scripting out the interview process, I really wanted to make sure that I shared with you and folks like you what I learned from those many years of interviewing candidates and seeing what went well and why it didn't go well when it didn't. So that's what my purpose is tonight, and for that reason I decided to write it down in a book, and as Steve mentioned, it's on Amazon and it's on barnesandnoble.com. And I just wanted to share those tips with folks that I learned over the years. And also, another reason I wrote the book is I had seen so many books out there and I was so disappointed because some of them were just so obvious. These tips that they would give you, like give a warm handshake, look them in the eye, or they'd give you, here's the question, here's your canned answer. And anybody who's been in an interview knows you don't know what they're going to ask you. So I don't want to give you canned answers. I want you to understand what is your interviewer looking for when you give an answer, so no matter what you're asked, you know how to answer it. And then the other reason I wrote the book is I wanted you to know, as I mentioned, what your interviewer is looking for. I wanted you to take a peek inside the mind of the interviewer. The book takes you inside the mind of the interviewer. You're going to see that tonight in this presentation, and give you that confidence so that you could answer. And you feel like, I've got this. I can answer any question well. And finally, to take some of the fear factor away and let you see, and hopefully you'll see this tonight, even in the first 3 tips we go through, that you're really in the driver's seat, more in control than you would ever think about the outcome of the interview. Sometimes it feels like we're sort of we're at the peril of the interviewer. But these tips will show you how really you are more in control than you would imagine of the results of that interview. So the book has 10 tips in it. We won't be going through all of them tonight, but we will be focusing on the first 3, which I call the interview fundamentals. And we're going to take these 3 one at a time and spend the majority of our time right there. So without further ado, let's get into the interview fundamentals. So the first one sounds kind of obvious, but if you're going to prepare for an interview, know what your interviewer is looking for. How can you prepare adequately if you don't know what you're going to be judged against? And all interviewers really are looking for the same buckets of things, the same types of things, even for different jobs, and we're going to talk about that. And the best way I can describe the importance of knowing what your interviewer is looking for is think of your college experience. How many people found it valuable to have a course syllabus when you went into a course? The syllabus that told you what are the requirements, what are the weights, what's going to be weighted more heavily, what is it exactly that the professor is looking for. Well, imagine if everybody in the course had that syllabus and you didn't have it, how disadvantaged you would be. You'd have no idea what you were going to be assessed against or what it would weigh in the final analysis for your grade. That's why the same thing is true for your interview. It's critical that you understand what your interviewer is actually looking for before you go into that interview. So what is your interviewer actually looking for? Well, if it's a good interviewer, and that's a caveat because not everybody's a good interviewer, but if it's a good interviewer, they're looking for 3 things. And they might not even consciously know this, but subconsciously, they're looking for 3 things always. And to help you remember them, I call them the 3 C's. The first being character, the second being competence, and the third being chemistry or compatibility. And let's talk about each of those real quickly. So by character, I mean attributes or qualities or traits that you have. Those are things that are formed way back in your development. in your childhood, in your family, in your social upbringing. Those are things like if you're a hard worker, if you're a motivated person, if you're a trustworthy person. All of those things are character traits. They have nothing to do with things that you've learned, like a skill or a knowledge, but it's kind of who you are. And why is that so important to an interviewer? Well, they can teach you a lot of things. They can send you to training classes. They can have you go get an extra degree. They could even pay for your extra degree. But this is something they can't teach you. The only time to really get a person of character, to assess their character, is during the hiring process. That's critical to them. So they're going to pay careful attention to your character during an interview. The second C is, the second C is competence. And by competence, I mean knowledge and skills and abilities that you've gained. These are things that can be learned or have been learned. So there are things like your communication skills, whether or not you speak Spanish, whether or not you know Microsoft Office. Those are competencies. So they're looking for that too. Some of those things are transferable across jobs, like communication skills, writing skills. Doesn't matter, could be multiple types of jobs need that. Some are very specific to a particular type of job, like a particular kind of program that you have to use in, or database that you have to use for a job. Some are technical, like software engineering skills, and some are behavioral, sort of quote unquote soft skills, like, oh, are they a good team player? And some of these, and you'll see these in job descriptions, are required. You can't even get off the dime unless you have certain competencies. And some are preferred. They're willing to teach you them, but they prefer that you have them when you enter into the interview. So that's the second C, is competence. Things that can be learned, knowledge and skills, or things you have learned. And the third is chemistry or compatibility. Now this one is less tangible than the others, the other two C's, but think of it this way. Think about somebody you've dated in the past, and maybe they had great character, and maybe they had wonderful knowledge and wonderful skills, great competence, but there just wasn't any kind of connection or rapport or spark or chemistry between you. Well, you probably wouldn't be dating them, even though they had all those other two C's, and you certainly wouldn't probably ask them to marry you. Well, the same thing is true for an interviewer. They're looking for somebody who they think is going to get along really, really well with the people in their organization. And they sort of, when they make you an offer, they're sort of asking you to marry into their organization. Well, they're not going to do that unless there's some sort of chemistry. They feel like people like to work with people that they really get along with well and have a great rapport with. So although this one's a little less tangible than the other two, it's the third C, and interviewers are looking for that too, to see how well you're going to get along with other people and in the culture. Now, Steve and I promised you a little bit of interactivity, and we're going to see if the technology works for us as it did when we practiced earlier. So let's hope for the best here. I think the chat function's working pretty well, so we're going to try doing this in the chat. But we're going to try to test your understanding of the three C's by saying which of the words below, likability, self-starter, typing skills, integrity, honesty, engineering knowledge, and congeniality, which of those fit in which columns above it? And we'll give you a concrete example by placing integrity. Remember, these are the things, your attributes and your traits. This is who you are, formed through the years, way before you went to college. These are things of who you are. So we put integrity in the character column. So now with your help, I'd like to know, what would you place besides integrity of the words below if you had to pick two more words to put in the character column, not integrity column, character column? What two words might you put in the character column? So I'm seeing a couple of people say honesty. Absolutely. Honesty for sure. Thank you for all those responses. Definitely, I would say self-starter and honesty. Congeniality is kind of a tricky one. You could almost put it under character. But congeniality, I think, has a slightly better fit somewhere else, which will although I can absolutely see sometimes character and chemistry and compatibility can be a little confusing, but we're going to go for best fit. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, too soon. What would you put under competence? What would you put under competence of the words below? What two words or phrases would you put under competence? And remember, these can be learned or have been learned. You guys are all spot on. Absolutely. Those are skills and knowledge. So those are competence. And last but not least, and by process of elimination, what would you put under chemistry or compatibility? This is how you get along with others. Well done. Well done. So if you look at the finish slide, absolutely true. You guys were right on target. Those are great examples of the 3 C's. And those are probably the best fit for those categories. Again, sometimes some of the chemistry ones you would be tempted to put under character, and I can see why, but I think that's probably the best fit, and you guys are right on target. Can you think, at the bottom of this slide, it asks a question, can you think of any other words, examples of a word that could go under character or competence or chemistry and compatibility? And if you can think of one, if you could put it in the chat and then just say what column you would put it under. So I'll throw one out there. Oh, good. Nashua, thank you. Competence, electronic medical record systems. Absolutely. Knowledge or skill in those systems would be a great example of competence. Team player, character, absolutely. Personable, great example of chemistry. Loyalty, character, right, Jeff, right, absolutely. Punctual, where would you put punctual, Melissa? Yep, character. Professionalism, I would say probably more character than chemistry, but Sarah, those are tough sometimes to distinguish. But yes, I would put it more under character. So I think you've got the idea of it. these three buckets. If it's a good interviewer, consciously or unconsciously, they're looking for these three things. And how do they actually find out if you have those three things? Whoops. So when you enter that interview, you are a blank canvas, basically. A blank canvas. Maybe there's a little bit of a sketch on there from your resume, but it's pretty much a blank canvas. Robert, thank you. I just saw yours. Mentoring is definitely a competence. That's a skill. But so if this is a blank canvas, you are a blank canvas to your interviewer, how do they find out about the three C's and paint the picture of your three C's on that canvas? Who paints that picture? Well, basically, yes, Heather, they ask questions and you paint the picture. You're in charge of what picture they paint by the answers to the questions that they were asked. Lisa, I see your question. Let's see if you can log that for later. We should probably capture that one. So what kinds of questions do they ask? Well, they ask all kinds of questions, but tip number 2 is a particular type of question that they ask to understand your three C's. We're going to hit that tip right now and see how they derive your three C's from something called behavioral event interviewing, or BEI questions. So BEI questions, you guys who have had interviews might recognize these questions. This type of question. Have they ever said in an interviewer, tell me about a time when you did such and such, or describe a situation when, and they're asking you to call out a situation from your past. And the reason that they're asking you to call out something from your past is the basic fundamental premise is past behavior is the greatest predictor of future behavior. So based on your answer of what you did in the past, they're gonna try to deduce what kind of an employee you're going to be for them in the future. So generally, they ask you to tell a story in three parts. They say, give me a situation that you faced, or a challenge, or an opportunity. What did you do to handle that situation? And what happened as a result of your actions? Now, some people use acronyms to help them learn how to do behavioral event interviewing questions and how to answer them. So you might see an acronym like CAR, context, actions, results, or STAR, situation, what was the task, what was the activity, what were the results. But whatever it is, they're always asking you to tell them a story in three parts. So, example, situation. They might say, tell me about a time when you had to work on a team. How did you go about it? And what were the results? Many of you have heard questions phrased like this. They're trying to understand your three C's by asking you a question like that. Sometimes they might just say, tell me about a time you had to work on a team. And they don't say, what did you do? And what were the results? But they're always looking for you to answer all three parts of that question. Even if they only ask you the first part, they're looking for you to say, what did you do in that situation? And what were the results? So you always want to answer all three parts. So how can they get your three C's? By listening to an answer to a BEI question like that. How can they deduce them? Well, let's take an example. Let's say you've got candidate 1 and candidate 2, both applying for the same job. They were both interviewed. The same interviewer asked them this question. Tell me about a time when you had to work on a team. I'm going to pretend I'm candidate 1, and then I'm going to pretend I'm candidate 2. Listen to the answers. Pretend you're the interviewer. Feel free to jot down some notes if you want to, because we're going to be a little interactive in a second. But listen and see if you can tell anything about the character, the competence, or the chemistry of these two candidates by their answers. So, interviewer says, tell me about a time you had to work on a team. I am now candidate 1. Well, I was in college and this professor had a group project and I was assigned to this group of people that I had never worked for before. I would not have handpicked them. They were not the brightest in the class, but I was put on their team. The team was so dysfunctional. Nobody knew what they were doing. Everybody was just flailing all over the place. People weren't doing their parts on time. I finally got so tired of the dysfunction that I just sort of separated myself from the rest of the group, did my own thing. At the end of the day, I went to the professor and I said, look, here's my part. I really can't speak for the rest of them. And I got a decent grade. I don't know how the rest of them did, but it was really the most dysfunctional team I've ever been on in my life. Okay, that's the answer from candidate 1. Same question. Tell me about a time you had to work on a team. And now I'm candidate 2. Well, I was assigned to a project team, a group project in a college course, and the professor assigned us. We didn't know each other at the beginning, and we started off a little bit rough, and people didn't know their individual parts, and we had trouble kind of coordinating. So I remembered that I had taken a project management course the semester before, and I asked the group if I could if they would allow me to make some suggestions to the team about project management techniques. And so they said, sure, we could use all the help we could get. We're not doing very well. And so what I did is I shared with them the idea of dividing the project up amongst each of us and giving us each chunks of the project. And put it on a project plan. I knew Microsoft Project, so we all put it into Microsoft Project. We all gave each other deadlines and a false deadline for putting the whole thing together at the very end, so we'd have time to make sure that it gelled, and it all came together really well at the end, and we all got a collective A on the project. All right. You heard 2 candidates' answers to the same question. It was a behavioral interview question, a BEI question. And did you hear anything about the candidate's 3 C's? Candidate 1's 3 C's, candidate 2's 3 C's. And based on what you heard, I'm going to open a poll. If I can make this technology work for us this time. And I'll give you 2 choices. And tell me, which candidate would you choose? 1 or 2? Who gets the job? And so the polling technique isn't working, but I'm seeing the answers in the chat, and that's perfectly fine. Lots of votes for candidate 2 so far. So candidate 2 seems to be the candidate of choice. Now, if you were the interviewer, as you were in this example, why did you choose candidate 2? And who painted that picture? Who led you to that conclusion? What did you hear about their chemistry or their competence or their character that led you to that conclusion? Feel free to jot down a comment or 2 in the chat. What did you hear about their chemistry, their competence, their character? So I'm seeing competence in terms of project management. They brought that effectively to the team. Upbeat, positive character trait. Team player, go-getter. Organization skills, that's a competence. I see character and competence. Enthusiastic, character trait, team player. Yeah, throwing other people under the bus. What would that say in terms of chemistry of hiring somebody onto a team in a company? What would you be afraid of if you hired that person? Took on a project manager. Snitch, I love it. Not loyal, character trait. Do you see how much one question, the answer to one question, if you answered one question like this, well or poorly, how much you were in control of how your interviewer heard your 3 C's come across? You have that much control in an interview. All you have to know is what they're looking for. They're looking for those 3 C's. And you are painting that picture for them. Make sense? All right, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to go a little more quickly through the next two, or the next tip. So we have some time for question and answers. This one, I love this one because to me, it's the most humorous. It's the most counterintuitive of all. The tip is called Realize It Is Not All About You. Your interview is not all about you. Well, you say that's counterintuitive because it's my interview, it's my job, it's my career, it's my life. What do you mean it's not all about me? Well, I'm going to explain what I mean by that. During the interview, you and your interviewer are playing different roles until you get a written offer, at which point you switch roles. But until you get a written offer, the interviewer is the buyer and you are the seller, selling yourself as the product. Now, why is that important to know that you're playing those roles? Well, I want you to listen to a typical selling example, and this is a non-professional example. So pretend you were going into your buyer, you're buying a brand new sports car, and you walk into a car dealership, a new car dealership, and up comes a salesperson. Now I'm going to give you 2 sales pitches, and I want you to listen to both. And now remember, this is the seller. You're the seller in an interview, selling yourself. Now here's the seller's pitches, and I'm going to give you 2 pitches. Here's the first one. If you buy this sports car, I would make a large commission off of you, which would allow me to take a nice vacation. My family would really like that. It would also really help my company achieve its sales goals and become more profitable. And if my company is profitable, I might even get a bonus this year. That's selling pitch number 1. That's the seller talking. Here's selling pitch number 2. If you buy this sports car, it will give you a sense of freedom and command of the road. You'll have lots of fun and will be the envy of all your friends. You'll also get great gas mileage and you'll have a high-quality vehicle that will last for years. And I'll even throw in a 5-year warranty so that you won't have any parts or service charges to worry about. That's selling pitch number 2. Again, our polling isn't working, but tell me in the chat, which one would you buy from? Which seller? Who's the best seller? 1 or 2? So I'm seeing a lot of votes for 2. And why is that? Because, right. 1 is all about who? It's about what you can do for me. That's the buyer. The seller is what can I do for you? This is why I say this tip is you're selling yourself as the product. You need to be selling like the pitch number 2. It's not about what they can do. It's about what you can do for them. What can I do for you? Yeah, selfish seller. So how does that play out in an actual situation in a job interview? This is a typical question in a job interview. Most every interviewer is going to ask you this question. Why do you want this job? That is a setup question. That is a setup because they want to see how good of a seller you are. Is this all about you, or is this all about what you can do for them? And I want you to listen to two candidates' answers again. You're going to vote one more time in this session, and listen to these answers and who is about what you can do for me or what I can do for you. So, candidate one. Oh, this is a psychologist position. They're interviewing, these two candidates are interviewing for the same position, a psychologist position in a family services center, a nonprofit family services center. Okay, candidate one. Why do you want this job? The answer is, I would like to use my master's degree in psychology and my clinical experience to help young children maximize their potential and overcome the obstacles presented to them by their challenging circumstances. I believe in the mission of this organization and its commitment to the welfare of every child, and I would be proud to lend my talents to advancing this goal. That's candidate one. Candidate two. I have a master's degree in psychology and I need a certain number of clinical hours to maintain my certification. This job would provide me with those hours when I meet with your clients. I would like to help with the good work of this organization, and the job would also provide me with the income I need to pay off some of my student loans. Okay, who would you hire? Who was about, I'm seeing a lot of number ones, And why was that? Why would you go with number one? Candidate number one, as a seller, was what I can do for you. Candidate two was acting more like a buyer. What can you do for me? Help me with my student loans. Just like that person selling the sales card by saying, hey, I could get a good bonus. I could go on vacation with my family. That's what candidate two was about. And it's surprising how many times this happens during an interview, that when you're asked, why do you want this job? You forget that you're the seller who should be talking about, what can I do for you? You're all right, Jacob. I like your comment. Okay, so recognizing that we're about out of time, I want to go quickly to the conclusion. And I thank you for all of your participation and in the chat feature. I've really enjoyed your comments. Here's a quick summary, and then we'll open it up. So tips 1 through 3. It's important to know what your interviewer is looking and listening for before you enter your interview. You're looking for your 3 C's: your character, your competence, and your chemistry and compatibility. You are the person who gives the impressions of your 3 C's. You paint that picture by the answers you give to their questions. And how do they get what kind of questions do they ask? They often ask behavioral event interviewing, BEI questions, to try to help discover your 3 C's. But even in that last question, which was, why do you want that job? That wasn't a BEI question. That told them a lot about your 3 C's right there. So any question, they're looking for your 3 C's. And during your interview, don't forget, the interviewer is buying, you're selling. So you always want to focus as the seller on what can I do for you, not what can you do for me. Instead of opening up right now for a chat for what else did we learn, hopefully you picked those things up as well as some other helpful tips. I'm going to open the floor for questions and answers at this point. And Steve, I think you're going to help me with that?
Okay, I should be here.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So the one question that came up throughout the presentation that was typed in was, a friend recently had an interview and was asked, why should we not hire you? So how do you answer that question, Patty?
So there's a whole chapter in my book, I think it's chapter 8, saying don't say anything negative. And that includes saying negative things about yourself. Now, sometimes people will ask you what's your greatest weakness, questions like this, trying to tempt you to speak negatively about yourself. There's a general rule of thumb in interviewing: don't say anything negative about anybody else, a past employer, a past coworker, a present coworker, a present employer. Never. And about yourself especially. So how do you answer when you're led down that path to say, why shouldn't you hire you? You want to hit the sweet spot between arrogance and humility. What I would say is you would say something like, I would probably say something like, I hope that you see by my background, my education, and my passion for this type of work and the answers I've given you today, that wouldn't give you any strong reason not to hire me. And just kind of turn that thing around, but with a degree of humility at the same time. And if they ever ask you something like, what is your greatest weakness, or something like that, you really try not to give them something that is unexpected or a character trait. You would try to give them something that is expected. Like, for example, if it was an internship position, you might say something like, inexperience in this area. And they would expect you to be inexperienced in that area if it was an internship. So you try not to give them anything that is unexpected or damaging.
Okay, great. And yeah, Melissa says there's no reason I am awesome. I think that's where you crossed the line a little bit, right? As Jake said there, you want to be humble as well.
Right. You want to hit the sweet stuff. You want to be confident, but you don't want to be arrogant.
Right.
And you, on the other end of the continuum, you don't want to be too humble. You really want to hit that sweet spot.
Let me ask you, I know you were kidding, Melissa. I know your sense of humor, and that's absolutely funny. I agree. And we talked in class about confidence and cockiness, as I put it, in that line. So I think that's what they were saying about the line there. These tips, Denine's saying, these tips would also be good if you're starting a business and are trying to obtain financing. She's saying with a question mark.
I think you can apply these tips in a number of areas. I think they're just general guidelines in life almost, but especially pertinent to interviewing. Yes.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question that a student recently asked me. And the student said, well, if I'm in an interview, what are some indicators that an interview might not be going very well? Are there things we can pick up when we're on, we're being interviewed, body language or anything from the interviewers that might be indicators to us that, maybe this isn't going very well?
I think there's two things. I think there's at the end there's definitely indicators. In the middle, which might be more what your student was asking you, I think I would pay attention to body language. I think I would pay attention when an interviewer starts changing roles with you. You know you're in a good place. So in other words, when they start selling you on the company and on the job, you know you're doing well. When they start trying to convince you, when they change from the buyer mode to the seller mode, you know you're doing well during the interview.
Yeah.
When they're not doing that and they're really kind of, body language frowning or, well, I don't really understand that, or, that didn't really go too well, or making comments like that, you know you're not hitting out of the park. But you know you are hitting out of the park when they're selling during the interview. At the end of the interview, when they start talking about next steps, when they start talking about, when might you be available to start if we offered you this position, those are very good indicators that it's going well.
All right. A little feedback for you from Diane. She said she appreciates the discussion of the 3 C's as they are applicable in sales situations, social situations, volunteerism, etc. Okay?
Yes, I think so too.
Nashua has a question. She says, should you still apply to a position that you have no experience in? example, moving from peer to management? And if so, what's the key to getting the interviewer to be attracted to your resume?
So I don't think there's ever harm in trying. I would pay attention. One of the tips in the book is paying careful attention to the position description. It's like having the answer key to a test. And part of that position description is going to tell you what is absolutely required versus what is preferred. And if they say on the job description, the position description, 3 years of managerial experience required, versus 3 years of managerial experience preferred, then that indicates to you whether or not you have a strong shot. If they say required, it is less likely that you will get an interview if your resume does not show that. But if you have some sort of supervisory experience and they're asking you for an X number of years of managerial experience on your resume, you want to really spotlight the requirements on your resume. So the question was, is there something you should put on your resume that would help draw their attention? Yes. Spotlight the heck out of every single thing that they are saying is required if you have any of that experience or knowledge. Spotlight that. Don't make them dig for it. Make that very clear.
All right. So, we were talking earlier about kind of walking that line, confidence and cockiness, or whatever you want to call it, arrogance. And Jacob said, how do you know where that line is?
Well,
find the sweet spot, he says.
Yeah, how do you find the sweet spot? You really want to have an air of humility, but not self-deprecation. So you don't want to say, I'm the greatest. If they say, why should we pick you? We have 3 finalists. Why should we pick you of the other 2? You don't want to say, I am better than them. You don't even know them. That's arrogant. That's cocky. And that's ill-founded. You don't even know those candidates. But what you can say with confidence is, if I were privileged, with a little humility in there, if I were privileged enough to get an offer, I believe strongly in the mission of this organization, and I would bring these qualifications and passion to the table. You would restate your qualifications with a little bit of a caveat of humility if I were privileged enough to get an offer. But you wouldn't downplay any other candidates. You wouldn't say you're better than anybody else, but this is what I would bring. And that's the sweet spot right there.
All right. I know we're running out of time, but can you hang with us for a couple of minutes, Patty, for a couple more questions? Or?
I can.
Okay. All right. Jeff, I see your question, not paying attention or easily distracted. I might need a little more explanation of that if you want to pose that to Patty. Heather has a good question here. Is there anything different that should be said or done if you are interviewing in front of a panel instead of just 1 or 2 people?
No, it's a little more challenging. I mean, the same rules apply, what people are looking for and how to answer these kinds of questions and how to paint that picture with your answers. I think the difference in a panel is it's tougher for the chemistry piece. It's tougher for the one-on-one rapport piece that you would be able to establish a little more easily with a little small talk or such with an individual across the desk from you. So what you'd want to do is really try to have eye contact, really take your time and make eye contact with all of the different people, smiling at the different people. You want to try to, if you know anybody on the panel or you have anything in common with anybody on the panel, you want to try to reach out to 1 or more and try to make a connection. That's the chemistry piece is the toughest piece on a panel. But in terms of your competence and your character in your answers, they're going to be very similar.
Okay. I'm going to try to combine the last 2 that I see here, I believe. And one is how to negotiate a salary without the experience necessary, but you have the educational background. And then the other one is, hang on just a second. I've always wondered how to discuss wages. Applications always ask for how much you want to make. How do I go about negotiating, or is it a trap? So can you talk a little bit about wage negotiation and how you address the salary that you're seeking?
Yeah, it is a trap, and I dedicate a whole chapter in the book to it because it is very, and sometimes there's no way to get out of giving a number, but you try at all costs not to give a number if you can avoid it. And ask, you really want to do some homework and become familiar with what a competitive salary or the range of salary is with the company that you are applying to. You try not to negotiate against yourself by being too high or too low by giving a number. So that if you can get away with it, and you can't always get away with it, you would want to say something if they ask you, so what kind of a salary are you looking for? Which they'll often do because they would really want you to negotiate against yourself. So what you would say is, I'm familiar with the salary range for this position, if you are, and I would be, if I were privileged enough to receive an offer, I would seriously consider anything that's competitive within that range for my level of experience. If you can do something like that, it puts the ball in their court. You can best negotiate salary. You're in the best position after you get a written offer. And if it's not too high, if it's too low, you can go back at that time. You have to go back carefully, and I put that in the epilogue of the book. It's how do you go back carefully at that time. But if you can avoid it, and sometimes you can't, they won't let you out the door, or out, you can't get past the application without it. Try not to be the first one to offer up a number if you can avoid it.
All right. And Jeffrey, thank you for the clarification. Yes, that makes perfect sense. I know Jeffrey has been on the hiring side as well, and he said when he was talking about being easily distracted or not paying attention, he was talking about if the interviewer is easily distracted or not paying attention, that may be an indicator that the interview is not going well.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
So he was addressing that, and thank you.
If they have checked out, then that's a huge indicator.
Yep. He says body language, tone, etc. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everybody for your participation tonight. If you've enjoyed the webinar, tell your friends, tell other alumni, tell students that the next one will be September 27th. And again, Sarah will be sending out information. You'll see information around campus for those of you who are current students in Student Central regarding more about the topic and the presenter when that time comes around. Patty, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to give us really strong, really good advice tonight that we can use. I know some people are typing in there. Do you mind if we share a copy of the PowerPoint with people? That's one of the questions I see.
No, I don't mind at all, and I do hope it's helpful to everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to spend this time with you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, before you hang up, tell us again how to find your book and what it's called.
It's called The Interview Answer, and then the subtitle is 10 Essential Tips for Acing Your Job Interview, and it's on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com.
Terrific. Okay.
It's in Kindle format as well as hardcover.
And if anybody wants to see it before you buy it and you're on campus or around campus, I have a copy in my office because Patty sent me one, and I really appreciate that. Okay, thank you very much, Patty. You might want to check out the chat there because you're getting a lot of thank yous and really good feedback and comments there. So everybody have a great evening, and we will talk to you again on the webinar September 27th. Good night.
Good night.